Hi everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Scott and this is Blue Liner Milsurps. Hey, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment or a question if you'd like. Just make sure it's nice and respectful. That's all that I ask. So welcome to video number 3 in our series on the U.S. Service Rifle, main battle rifles of the U.S. military. And this week we are going to be discussing the single most iconic bolt-action rifle in the history of the United States and its length of service and how well it was received, and what it did certainly earns it that title, the most iconic bolt-action rifle. But hey, before we get to that, we need to kind of recap our history before we get there. So before this rifle, the U.S. was using the 1892, 94, 96, 98 Krag Jorgensen. And this was used in the Spanish-American War, the Philippine Insurrection, the Boxer Rebellion. After the Spanish-American War, the U.S. Military Ordnance Board decided to do an inquiry and take a look at the Krag Jorgensen and see why they felt it did not perform quite as well as opposed to the Spanish Model 1893 Mausers that it faced in Cuba. We are all well aware of the Rough Riders in San Juan Hill, but it turns out that only about 750 Spanish soldiers held off 8,000 Americans and inflicted heavy casualties, and they wanted to know why. So they took a look at the Spanish Mauser and that they had brought back captured versions of it, compared them to the Krag Jorgensen, and found that Spanish Mauser had really outclassed the Krag Jorgensen. Remember, the Krag Jorgensen has this side loading. You have to load them individually. And they kind of found three main things. One, the ease of loading. The Mauser had stripper clips. It was loaded through the top, and they could load very fast with those stripper clips, as opposed to the U.S. soldiers that were trying to put individual rounds into this magazine. The other thing they found was the bolt design. The Krag Jorgensen here has only a single locking lug for its bolt, and the Mauser bolt had two, and it was much stronger and a better bolt design. And the third thing they found was the round. The 7mm Mauser round that the Spanish Mausers used was a much better round than the 30-40 Krag, much better ballistic. So they decided it was time to start looking for a new rifle. Unlike the last time, they did not hold trials. They decided to develop this one in-house at the Springfield Armory. So I'm going to take the Krag and move it out of the way because we have done our recap, and now it's time to talk about its replacement. So the U.S. Military Ordnance Board decides to develop this in-house. And starting in 1900, they began to develop a bunch of different prototypes that had different configurations, and they tried them out. And ultimately, they would come to the 1903 Springfield. Now, if you're interested in all those prototypes, it's not the scope of this video, but if you look at Sea and Arsenals, they can tell you, in their video on the M1903, they talk about all the different prototypes and the different things, including one idea was to develop stripper clips for the Krag, so that when you open it up, you could actually use a stripper clip to put the rounds in. It did not go over well. So they ended up developing this rifle, which resembles a Mauser a whole lot in a lot of different ways. And we're going to talk about this. So the first thing they did was they also developed a new cartridge. The new cartridge was adopted at the same time the rifle was. The rifle would be given the nomenclature of the US Springfield 30 caliber model of 1903 because it was adopted in 1903, and they began production of the early ones of these in 1904. The round that they developed was still a 30 caliber round, but much better ballistics. And they named the round the 3003 rather than naming the powder grains like they did on the 30-40 Krag. they decided to name the cartridge after the year of its adoption. So it's a 30 cal adopted in 1903. So it's a 30-03. I'll put a picture of that right here for you. It was a round nose bullet and cartridge, and that was adopted in 1903. Now we know that eventually that this would be upgraded to the 30-06 because in 1906 they developed a different round, and I will show you that shortly. So the board decided in 1903, after they had gone through all the prototypes, that this was going to be the rifle that they decided to use. So let's go over some of the characteristics of the US Springfield 30 caliber model 1903. It is 8.9 pounds. It has a 24-inch barrel, and it's 43.4 inches long. And they decided to just adopt one rather than adopting a long infantry rifle and then a shorter one for a shorter carbine for cavalry and artillery and support troops. They just decided to make one rifle that would do the whole thing, and that's why they came up with a 24-inch barrel. So this was to serve all branches: infantry, cavalry, artillery, support troops. All would have the exact same rifle, the same length, same barrel, everything. So what I'm going to do now is stop the video real quick, and I'm going to go front to back and show you some of the very interesting characteristics of this rifle and how it works. So hang tight for just a second while I reset the camera. Okay, I've repositioned the camera, and we're going to kind of go through this. I'm going to leave the camera in place so I can have two hands and show you some of the features of the M1903. Now this one is an original 1903, I believe. According to the markings, it was made in 1910. So we're going to start here at the front. We do have a simple blade sight here, very thin, easy to use. It's on a pretty big sight holder here, and you cannot drift that either one way or the other. Only an armor can do that. Simple nose cap, a stacking swivel, that's what that is for. One simple barrel band in the middle with a spring, and it is slung on the underside, and it does have hand grooves. On the top, on the sight, it is a ladder sight. It does have adjustments there. The battle sight for this actually is 550 yards. So that's the battle sight for this. It does have adjustments here that you can use, and it goes up to 2,100 yards. So that is how the sight works. Here we have the bolt, very simple bolt. I'm going to turn around and show you the other side, but we have the safety on top. So let's go ahead. It is a cock on open. It has a safety on top. So, and it does have a lock on the magazine for a last round. So once the soldier has expended his rounds, it will lock that back as long as the magazine is what was being used. The safety is a 3-position safety. When it's over here on the left, you can actually see where it says ready, because they made this infantryman proof. And as I said before, as a former United States Army infantryman, it's good when they put writing on there so he can read. So ready on that side. The other side, it'll say safe, because now nothing will happen. And then it does have, just like a Mauser, the flag all the way up for when you need to disassemble. So right now it's on the ready. And then it has a simple straight stock with a butt plate. Now let me turn around. I'm going to show you the really neat magazine cutoff on the side. So this is the magazine cutoff. So once again, they made it infantryman proof, on and off. So What that means is the magazine itself, when it is down in the off, this is a single loader. And what that means is that when we pull the bolt back, it will not pick up a round out of the magazine because this stop keeps it from going back far enough to pick up a round out of the magazine. If we put it back on, then when the comes back, it allows the bolt to go back far enough that it would pick up another round out of the magazine. And then the other thing is for this is the middle. Where is it? There it is. That's how you would take the bolt out. And that's your for taking the bolt out right there in the middle. So, okay, that is the features of the rifle. It is, for all intents and purposes, a lot like a Mauser. I'm not going to say it is a Mauser, but it is a lot like a Mauser, and we're going to discuss some of the other things of what happened because it was a lot like a Mauser a little later on. So hang tight for another couple seconds while I readjust the camera and get this back to our original camera configuration. Be right back. Okay, we're going to continue on with our history of the M1903 Springfield. So when the U.S. adopted this in 1903, originally this had what was known as a rod bayonet. It was actually stored underneath here, and you would take and pull it out. Now, when this was shown to President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt at the time, Teddy Roosevelt thought that was the stupidest thing he had ever seen, and he wanted it removed. So by 1905, they had reconfigured this so that they would have a lug on the bottom, and they issued what is known as the Model 1905 bayonet, which is what this one here is. Was made by the U.S. Armory at Springfield, and this one was actually made in 1909, and this is the original length of that bayonet. And they replaced the rod bayonet, which was supposed to be, I think, both a bayonet and a cleaning rod, with a bayonet lug, and then they put a three-piece cleaning rod in the buttstock. So that's how that happened. That's where Teddy Roosevelt, a combat veteran of the Spanish-American War, said, that is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Get rid of it. I don't want it on my Army's rifle. That happened, and by 1905, they had retrofitted most of them. And starting in 1905, all the new ones made would have the bayonet lug, and they retrofitted. If you ever find a 1903 with the original rod bayonet, that is a real collector's item and would be worth a whole lot of money. They also adopted in 1906 the new bullet, and that would be this, the 30-06 Spitzer bullet, meaning that it's pointed. Remember, the 30-03 had a rounded nose. This was what known as a Spitzer bullet with a tip on the end. This had much faster muzzle velocity. It shot flatter, and it had much better ballistics than the 30-03. And it was the same bullet diameter, so they didn't have to do anything. They just changed the bullet, and the sights were updated, and that's how they ended up with the 30-06. And the 30-06 would serve the U.S. military all the way through to the 1950s and early 1960s as its main cartridge for this and for many other rifles to come. And they just kept that 30-06, and they're so readily available today. And in fact, there are many civilian rifles that come out that are in 30-06 because it's a great hunting round as well, I understand. So let's discuss two quick myths about this rifle. Let's set the record straight. The first myth I want to talk about is one that you hear a lot, that Mauser sued the United States and we paid royalties for years because we stole their designs. The devil's in the details. Mauser never actually sued the United States. That was something different. In 1904, the chief of the ordnance at Springfield Armory actually wrote a letter to the Mauser Corporation. They're not stupid people at Springfield. They knew that they had ripped off the Mauser design when they brought all those 1893 Spanish Mausers back and took a lot of those features. So they sent a letter over to Mauser, and they sent some of these rifles as samples over to them, and they said, hey, did we infringe on any of your patents? Mauser came back and said, yes, as a matter of fact, you infringed on 5 patents on the rifle and 2 patents on the stripper clips that are used to feed this rifle. They had some back and forth, and eventually they settled for a royalty price of 75 cents per rifle and 50 cents per 1,000 stripper clips made, to max them out at $200,000. That was eventually paid and done by 1910, 1911, somewhere around there. So that was paid off. So they weren't sued by Mauser. What happened was that they asked Mauser, did we infringe? Mauser said yes. They negotiated. They came to a price. The United States paid Mauser the money way before World War I ever came around. So they were done paying the Mauser Corporation way before World War I. Where the myth comes from happens to be with the 30-06 round and the Spitzer round. A few years later, Mauser's parent company, called DWM, and it's a 3 very long German names and words. I'll see if I can't figure it out and put this down here on what it is, but we just call them DWM. They happen to be Mauser's parent company. And they actually sued the United States because they said that the 30-06 Spitzer bullet infringed on their patent. That lawsuit was ongoing through 1917, when the United States declared war on Germany in April of 1917. What happened at that time was, while the lawsuit was going on between the United States government and a private company in Germany, the United States, they had a board, a patent board. They decided under a law passed by Congress that allowed the United States to seize a patent during wartime to facilitate U.S. War aid, and to facilitate, of course, the U.S. military if it needed something, and that's what they did. When the war was over, DWM picked up the lawsuit. The U.S. actually won the lawsuit because they were actually able to prove that the Spitzer round that they adopted here, they had actually had drawings of this way before this rifle was ever adopted, back in the late 1890s, when they were messing around with the Spitzer bullet. So they actually won that part of the lawsuit. The part of the lawsuit that they lost was DWM sued them for seizing the patent illegally. They won that part of the lawsuit. They sought $250,000. They ended up being awarded $400,000, and that one took some decades for the U.S. to pay off. So that's the myth of, we got sued by Mauser. No, we settled with Mauser. It was letters going back and forth, some lawyers. We settled for $200,000 for all the different Mauser features that are on here, including the stripper clips. We paid them. We were sued for the Spitzer bullet. We won that one, but we had seized the patent illegally, and that's what we ended up paying for. So that's myth number 1. Myth number 2 has to do with the serial numbers on here. So there is this myth that if you have what's known as a low serial number and you shoot a modern ammunition through it, it's going to blow up. Now, nothing could be further from the truth. But once again, the devil's in the details. So if we see on this one, you can see this is the serial number 458051. This was made in 1910. One of the markings that you will find on 1903 are the barrel markings. There's a flaming bomb here, and then the date is November of 1910. And you can actually match the serial numbers and the Springfield Armory, the U.S. National Park Service, which runs the Springfield Armory now that it's shut down in the 60s, actually keeps all the serial number dates on hand, and they're online, so you can find it. So this one was made in 1910. The myth that it's going to blow up comes from this. During World War I, when the U.S. was just cranking out serious numbers of these as best they could, and the Rock Island Arsenal also were cranking these out, some of these failed the proof testing. The U.S. Ordnance conducted an investigation. They found it had to do with two things. Number one, ammunition that they had at the time was not quality controlled, and it was bad. The ammunition had a much higher failure rate, meaning that the cases split and dangerous gases would go everywhere inside here rather than out the end of the barrel. That was causing the receivers to have catastrophic failures. And what they found with the receiver had to do with the heat treating. Now, when you make a receiver and you heat treat it, you have to heat it to a certain point for a certain period of time that hardens the steel. And it leaves the inside of the steel to a certain point, and the outside is hardened, and that means that it can take these pressures that when these rounds go off, or even if they rupture, that it won't cause a catastrophic failure. But if it's done incorrectly, you can actually make the steel very brittle. And I think there's a story told that the head of the ordnance, or the head of the director of the Springfield Armory at the time, actually brought some out, and he hit them with a hammer, and they actually shattered. So the investigation found this. It found that some of these receivers had been heat treated incorrectly. There were big kilns and heat treating buildings on the Springfield Armory and the Rock Island Armory. Turns out, rather than using precision instruments called pyrometers to judge the heat, so you have to heat them to a certain point, hold them, and then cool them very quickly, and that's what hardens the steel. Usually it's done twice, but in this case, they were only doing it once. They were eyeballing it. They weren't using pyrometers. So they would look at the color of the steel, and if it looked right, that was good, and they would say, okay, we've hit the mark. The problem is that sunny days and cloudy days made the steel look different. And I'm not sure which one was the good day or which one was the bad day, but it turns out that some receivers on some of those days were improperly heat treated, because the sunny days, it looked different than on the cloudy days. So they installed pyrometers and they started doing it correctly. Now, there's a big debate in the collector community about if you have a low serial number, those that were made before that time, that they automatically assume that they were heat treated wrong, and that if you put any rounds through it, it's going to blow up. So the serial number for Springfield Armory, I believe, is anywhere below 850,000. They started at 1, went to 850,000. And then at the Rock Island Arsenal, they were very precise, like 257,000 was the Rock Island, or somewhere in that vicinity. So, and if you see, there's a whole ton of videos on the internet that explains this. There are different opinions. I have shot this with modern 30-06 rounds that are loaded specifically by PPU and Federal. They make them specifically for this and for the M1 Garand with the loads that they know they can handle. In my opinion, this one was made in 1910. It went all the way through World War I, probably World War II. And if it was going to explode, I think it would have done so by now. So I don't have a problem shooting it. But there are others that will just swear that don't do it, it'll blow up, certain. So, your mileage may vary. I don't know. I don't have any problem shooting this. I've shot quite a few rounds through it. I think if this was one of those that was so brittle that it would blow up, it would have done so a long time ago. A rifle made in 1910, they all went to France and took part in World War I, and then they were brought back as backup rifles in World War II. And if it was going to blow up, I think it would have done so by now. So I don't have a problem shooting it. I've shot quite a few rounds for this, and I don't have a problem. What I don't do is shoot a whole bunch of rounds through it at the same time. So I will probably limit it to 20 or less at a range setting. That's just my feeling. That's how I do it. Your mileage may vary. If you think that shooting this is automatically going to make it blow up after 100 and well over 115 years now that it's been around and been shooting a lot of rounds, I don't think it's going to blow up now, or it's going to have any kind of catastrophic failure. So those are the two myths I wanted to talk about when it comes to the M1903. But you know what? We're not done talking about this, because you know what happens next? We're going to take apart the bolt, we're going to put it back together, and then I'm going to talk about the next version of this rifle, because there was more versions that came out after this, starting in the late 1930s, actually in the 1920s. They started with different versions of this, different stocks, different versions, and by the time we get to World War II, this would serve as, again, as a frontline rifle to some troops and backup rifles to others, and they made a different version of this. So we're going to discuss that. So I'm going to stop the video. We're going to do our bolt disassembly and reassembly real quick, and then we're going to bring one of those other rifles over, and I'm going to show you that one. Be right back. Okay, everybody, we're back. We're going to go over our bolt disassembly and reassembly, still using the original M1903. So the first thing we do when we're going to do this is, of course, we're going to open the bolt, of course, make sure that we're unloaded, nothing in the magazine. So before we start, I'm going to put gloves on because I hate getting any part of my skin caught in spring tensioned parts. All right, so first thing we have to do is put it into battery and make sure it's cocked. And then we take our flag safety right here and we move it to the straight up position. And then on our magazine cutoff, we have to put that to the straight out. That will allow us to remove the bolt. Okay, now that we have the bolt out, and I'm gonna bring this down, bring this closer so that you can actually see the bolt here. So what we have on our bolt here is we have an exterior extractor, not unsimilar to the mouse. We have 3 locking lugs, 2 up here on the front and 1 here on the back. Let me get the pokey out here so we can see. So 1, 2 locking lugs and 3 right here. This is kind of our safety locking lug. Now, to take the bolt apart, the first thing we have to do is unscrew the bolt part from the bolt body here. And there's a little button right here that goes into this recess. And as long as that button is, this won't move. So in order to unscrew this from the bolt body, we just have to push in on that, and then we can unscrew it counterclockwise. And then it comes out from the bolt. We can also take off the extractor, the exterior extractor. We see that there's a little groove right here that you can see. And our extractor kind of hugs that little recess, that little rim right there. So if we want to take it out, we have to bring it around on this side where that groove no longer exists. So we just push it around to the back of the bolt here. And once we do that, it'll come out of that groove, push up, and it just comes right off. It's the putting it back on part that's kind of fun. So with our bolt, our striker and our firing pin, our bolt sleeve, and our cocking piece. So we have to get the striker. This is the striker. We have a collar here. We have a firing pin spring, and underneath this is the actual firing pin that ends right here. And then we have the bolt sleeve right here. In order to remove all of this and take this apart, we have to take the tension off of this spring right here. So we're going to do that by moving the flag over here to the ready position. When you do this, make sure you don't, this is going to snap up. So make sure that you have everything clear, all body parts and fingers and everything clear, so that when you do, it will not snap. So I kind of hold it like this, and then I take the hold the bolt sleeve and then just push this over, and then the cocking piece will come, and we now have relieved our tension. So now we can just put it on a solid piece, just take and pull down on that collar, and then our firing striker, the striker there comes right off. We have that bolt sleeve or the bolt firing pin collar, spring, and then we can separate the firing pin with the cocking piece and the sear, separate it from the bolt sleeve. And now we have our bolt taken apart. Now, putting the bolt back together, before we do that, and one thing I want to show you. So you see on our cocking piece, we have our firing pin, we have our cocking piece. There's two little indents right here. And those fit on here. So remember, we had it in the middle upper position. In order for it to do that, the end of this flag piece here has to go into the groove right there. Otherwise, it's not going to work, and the safety will not go up, because once we get this put back in, we have to pull this back out in order to screw it in. So we leave it in the ready position. We'll put our firing pin back in all the way forward. Firing pin spring, set it on something solid. Now we have to take our little collar here, and the ribbed part goes down towards the spring, and the solid part goes up towards the striker. So we're just going to pull down on our spring so we can fit that collar on, and then using the collar, we pull it down even more. Try that again. And once we have that down, we can get our striker. It goes on, and then the collar will come up under the tension and hold that striker on. Now we have this back into its proper configuration. Now we just needed to get it into the configuration so that we can screw it back into the bolt. In order to do that, we have to get the sear back. So this is the fun part, where we have to pull this back enough that we can push this flag safety up, because it has to go into that groove. So we have to pull it back to a certain position, and once we get it into that position, it should. It didn't work that time. Let's try it again. So I have to get it back to the right position, and then with my other finger, with my thumb, push that up so it will go into those grooves. If you don't get it, there it goes. And now the bottom of that flag is sitting in that groove, and that is how we get it back together. Now, before we can screw it into the bolt, we're going to have to put the extractor back on. So we come again to the side of the bolt that does not have the groove. We have to get that into our little channel right here and push it down. And when we do that, kind of have to hold it there. There it goes. And then pull the top of it back just a little so we have it kind of sitting on the rim, and then you turn it back into the groove so that it goes back in. And there it goes. And now our extractor is back, and it goes over that side locking lug there. Now we can take this, because it's back in that configuration, and we can screw it back into the bolt. till that button gets back in the position it's supposed to be in. Now we have our bolt completely reassembled, and we can put it back into our rifle here. Down. Move that to lock it in. Now we can do our function check. We'll put it over on ready. It does work. We'll cock the bolt again. Put it on safe. Trigger does not pull. Bolt is locked. Put it back over on ready. It fires, and we are good. And that is bolt disassembly and reassembly. Okay, one more segment. We're going to talk about the next iteration of this very same rifle. And I'm going to reset the camera for that. So hang out with me for just one more segment of the video as we discuss the next iteration of the M1903, because the US is far from being done with this beautiful and iconic rifle. Be right back. All right, after our bolt disassembly and reassembly, we're back to talk about the next iteration of the M1903, and that would be this rifle, the M1903A3. Now you say, well, what happened to A1 and A2? Well, in the 1920s, Springfield, having made so many of these for World War I, didn't really need to make any more Springfields for the Army, so they started making what was known as national match rifles. Very precision-made Springfields, and those were named the A1s because they had a stock with a pistol grip on it, and they were for competition shooters, and they were called national match M1903s. Those were considered the A1 versions. The A2 versions were trainers. I believe those were in 22. Those were trainer rifles in a different caliber, in the 22 caliber, I believe. I'm positive about that. If anyone knows, please leave a comment about that. I believe that's what the A2 was, the 22 trainer. And then we have the A3 version. So what happened was, of course, in 1936, the United States adopts the M1 Garand. That will be the subject of another video coming up in our US service rifle series, the M1 Garand. But it was adopted formally in 1936. And as I've said before, just because you adopt a rifle doesn't mean you immediately have enough to give to everyone in your military. So these remained in frontline service as they were making the M1 Garands. When the winds of war began to blow in 1939, 1940, 1941, the U.S. felt that they needed even more of these 1903s, so they actually contracted to private companies to make them, as Springfield and Rock Island were cranking out M1 Garands, 1911 pistols, 30 caliber Browning machine guns, and a whole host of other weapons that we had, the BAR, the Browning automatic rifle. They contracted to Remington initially, and then Smith Corona as well, to start making the 1903s. And those were to be used for support troops, backup troops, and for the frontline troops that had not been issued the M1 Garand yet. So Remington started to make those. Remington actually used the leftover machinery from Rock Island from World War I, but they found that the machinery really didn't work that well. It had been in storage for almost 20 years. And they came up with a little better way to make the M1903A3 a little easier, a little cheaper. And so the changes between the original 1903 and the A3 are these. A, they use a lot of stamped parts. So the 1903, especially on the butt plate, or not the butt plate, the magazine plate on the bottom, the trigger guard, and the other parts like the bands and such, rather than milling them, they made stamped parts. And those were a lot easier to manufacture that way. One of the other things that they did was they changed the barrel from a 4-groove barrel to a 2-groove barrel. They found out that it didn't really have a big effect on accuracy, so they went to a 2-groove barrel. But the biggest change they made was the rear sight here. So let me get this. For some reason, my sling is coming apart. Here we go. So let's take a look at this rear sight. This was the biggest change. So on the original 1903, we had our rear sight was a ladder sight up here. They changed this to a peep sight here on the back. And this peep sight on the back worked a lot better and was a lot cheaper to make, and the soldiers liked it better. So it has both elevation and windage adjustments. So to elevate, for elevation, all you had to do was push that peep sight up and down. And it actually had a battle sight of 200 yards instead of 550 like the original 1903. So they could adjust from 2 all the way up to its maximum mount. It did have a windage adjustment here on the side, and this was just a much better sight than that big ladder sight. And this was a lot easier and cheaper to make. So the 1903A3, the biggest and easiest way to tell the difference is the original 1903 has a ladder sight here. The 1903A3 has this peep sight on the back. The bolt, the internal magazine, everything else is the same. One of the other slight changes is the stock. So remember, the original 1903 had the straight stock. These had stocks. They wanted to use them with the full pistol grip, but they ended up machining these to where it had kind of a partial one, and these were called scant stocks. And I believe they were initially meant for the A4, the sniper version. That's what came after this, is this 1903 A4, which is the sniper rifle. But you will find a lot of 1903s with straight stocks, with full pistol grips, with scant stocks. They were basically using whatever they had in inventory to put them together. So that is the 1903 A3. Not a big difference from the 1903 original, except for the sight and some of the stamp parts and such. That is it. And the 1903 A3 would be part of, I believe they were not just for secondary troops, but they were also for some frontline troops that had not gotten the M1 Grand yet. I do remember seeing pictures of D-Day +4, +5, +8 of troops coming ashore carrying the M1903A3 because they had not been given the M1 Grands. The first troops that went ashore all had M1 Grands, but some of the other troops, the supply troops, those that came ashore later on, as well as reserve troops, were carrying M1903A3s, actually. And I believe the Marines in the Pacific at Guadalcanal and Tarawa had not been given the M1 Grands, and they carried the original M1903s and some A3s when they went ashore on those 2 islands. They would eventually get the M1 Grand. So that is going to be it for our video on the M1903 and its iterations of the A1, A2, A3, and then the A4 would be the sniper version. They would actually remove this rear sight and put a scope on here. The A4 would be the sniper version. The M1903 would go on to serve. It served in World War I, World War II, Korea, and even Vietnam. The sniper versions did. This was probably one of, if not the, up to that time, the longest serving U.S. service rifle in the military for the United States, well over 60 years. And that's why it has earned the title of the most iconic bolt-action rifle ever to serve in the United States military. But funny little thing about this is that even as I sit here with the A3 version, the original M1903 we think of as our main battle rifle for World War I, which is true. It was our main battle rifle for World War I, but it was not the most plentiful rifle given to the infantry of World War I. There was actually another rifle that was issued to U.S. troops in France in World War I, that there were more of them than the M1903A3, even though officially on paper the 1903 was the official battle rifle of the United States Army during World War I. Only about 25% of our troops actually had 1903s. The other 75% had a different rifle, our auxiliary main battle rifle, during that period. And that rifle is going to be the subject of our next video in the U.S. Service Rifle series. So come back and see what that rifle is. I'll give you a hint. It was based on a British rifle model from 1914. And that was the rifle that actually 75% of the troops in World War I in France used. And we're going to talk about that rifle in our next U.S. Service Rifle video series. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I appreciate that. Hey, why don't you hit like, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do that. Leave a comment, a question, or if I got something wrong or I wasn't very clear, feel free to put that in the comments below. Thanks a lot for hanging out with me today. That's going to be it for this video. Our videos come out every Sunday afternoon. That's why we call them Sunday Gun Day videos. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day or rest of your week, whatever the case may be. Thanks, and I'll see you in our next video. Bye-bye.